You build something meaningful. Your work is good. People rely on you. So why is there so much tension inside? Why do these questions keep surfacing? Questions about what defines you now, what your work stands for in this season, why what you're building still matters, just not in results, but in purpose. This is the tension between being broadly capable and being clearly defined, between doing many things well and knowing which things are truly aligned with who you are becoming. That same tension shows up in unexpected places. To non-whiskey drinkers, the difference between whiskey and bourbon can feel like two names for the same thing. They look similar, they're poured into the same kind of glass, they're used interchangeably. Most people don't give it a second thought. But for others, that distinction matters a lot. They may not be experts, but they do understand the difference. They know the distinction signals standards. It communicates identity, and it shapes expectations. And that's why this difference matters beyond whiskey and bourbon. In leadership and in work that carries real responsibility, people don't always know how to explain why they trust something or someone, but they feel clarity when it's present. They recognize when something stands for something. They're willing to wait for it, and they align with it. Today, we're going to explore the difference between category and identity, what that difference reveals about leadership and purpose in this season, and why clarity often comes from defining what truly matters. I can see why people confuse whiskey and bourbon. It makes sense. They look similar. They're served in the same kind of glass. And in the broadest sense, bourbon is whiskey. But bourbon is a specific kind of whiskey with a specific identity. The simplest way to think about it is like this. Whiskey is the category. Bourbon is a specific identity within that category. They share a category, but not the same definition. At a high level, all whiskey follows the same basic process. Grain is mashed. Sugars are fermented. The liquid is distilled. And then it's aged. That's the shared foundation. Where whiskey becomes especially interesting is in how much variation is allowed after that point. Different whiskeys use different grains: corn, rye, barley, wheat. They're distilled to different proofs. They're aged for different lengths of time, often aged in barrels that have already been used. Those barrels may have held sherry or wine. That means that whiskey can carry shared influence, flavors shaped by what came before it, character formed through reuse and reinterpretation. That flexibility is one of whiskey's greatest strengths. It allows for range, creativity, expression. Whiskey can be many things and still be called whiskey. Bourbon begins from that same foundation. Then it makes a different commitment. To be called bourbon, the whiskey must meet defined requirements. Among them, it must be made in the U.S. It must contain at least 51% corn and be aged in new charred oak barrels. Those requirements aren't about prestige. They're about identity. The corn-forward grain bill gives bourbon its familiar character. A rounder mouthfeel, natural sweetness, flavors often described as caramel or vanilla. And the new oak barrels ensure that each batch is shaped by the present. Fire, time, and intention, not borrowed influence. Those choices create consistency. They create alignment. They establish a recognizable identity from one bottle to the next. This doesn't make bourbon better than other whiskeys. It makes it more defined. Whiskey's strength is its range of expression. Bourbon's strength is its commitment to alignment. That difference between variation and definition is where this conversation begins to matter. Some people don't care what you call it. Whiskey, bourbon, close enough. They're ordering a drink, not making a statement. Others choose bourbon intentionally. They know the experience they're choosing. They recognize what it represents, and they align with that identity. So when someone refers to their bourbon as just another whiskey, it can feel off. The issue isn't about accuracy. It's identity. Something intentional gets flattened into something general. When something stands for something, people want that distinction honored. I saw this play out recently, just a few minutes from my house. A new In-N-Out burger opened nearby. If you've never been to In-N-Out, here's what matters. They're a fast food burger chain, but they don't operate nationwide. They expand slowly and intentionally. They're known for doing just a few things, but really well. They have a simple menu: burgers, fries, and shakes. Very little variation. Clear standards, fresh ingredients, and the same process at every location. For months, local Facebook pages tracked the construction. New stories covered every milestone. And when it finally opened, people waited for hours. Cars wrapped around the building, lines backed up onto the street. What made it interesting wasn't the crowd. It was the context. There are plenty of other burger places nearby. Faster options, more convenient options, bigger menus. People weren't waiting because they lack alternatives. They were waiting because they knew exactly what they were getting. In-N-Out knows who they are. And because of that, people recognize the difference, and they're willing to wait. Leadership can feel the same way. Early on, having breadth is an advantage. Being adaptable matters. Responding quickly matters. Covering ground matters. For many of us, that season looks like saying yes more than saying no. Taking on additional responsibility. Proving we can handle more. We become dependable, versatile, the ones who keep things moving. Often that posture works, because that's what building a career actually requires for a time. It's how credibility is earned, how trust is built, how momentum gets created when nothing exists yet. For many of us, that way of leading wasn't accidental. It was necessary. There's nothing wrong with leading in a broad category, like the whiskey category. Whiskey adapts. It meets many needs. For some of us, that season was exactly what was required. But for some, what we want begins to shift. The metrics that once mattered start to feel incomplete. The questions get deeper. It becomes less about what we're capable of and more about what feels worth giving our energy to now. The tension isn't about capacity anymore. It's about coherence. About whether what we're building still matches what we care about. About whether our leadership still feels honest in this season. And it's where the bourbon analogy helps. The shift isn't about becoming the best whiskey. It's about becoming an intentional bourbon. Identifying our own standards and requirements, and naming them. Aligning our thinking, decisions, and actions around that definition. releasing the pressure to be everything to everyone, and allowing our outward identity to reflect an inward certainty. When that alignment takes shape, people notice. Leadership starts to feel more intentional. The choices aren't just defensible, they're aligned. Decisions begin pointing in the same direction instead of pulling energy across way too many fronts. Being a whiskey wasn't a mistake. For many of us, it was the right expression for that season. But seasons change. And what once helped us build may not be what helps us go deeper. Significance often asks a different question. Not how much can we handle, but how clearly are we living in alignment with our purpose? This shift often announces itself very quietly. For many of us, the clearest signal sounds like this. Everything feels important. Every initiative matters. Every request carries weight. Every decision feels loaded. And when everything feels important, nothing feels anchored. The work keeps moving, but the why behind it becomes harder to name. We find ourselves asking different questions, not about what we're building, but about what's actually serving. Many of us are still leading from identities that worked before, roles that fit, ways of operating that earned us trust, patterns that helped us succeed. But staying there keeps us in the whiskey category. Adaptable, capable, broadly useful, even as something is asking for clearer definition. Looking through the bourbon lens offers another way to understand this moment. Instead of measuring success by how much we can carry or how many directions we can cover, the focus shifts towards coherence. One place this becomes visible is at the foundation. Bourbon must be at least 51% corn. That threshold isn't about restriction. It's about identity. Remove it and it becomes something else entirely. For us, a similar question begins to surface. What must be present for this work to still feel true? What, if removed, would mean we've drifted from our center? Another place it shows up is in the environment. Bourbon isn't shaped by barrels that once held something else. It's formed in new, charred oak. Many of us still draw heavily from past seasons, roles that worked, identities that once fit. But what if the current season, with all its heat and pressure, is meant to do its own formative work? Eventually, the signal changes. When we stop trying to be everything for everyone and begin living from a clear identity, coherence follows. Others may not always be able to explain it, but they will sense it. Trust deepens. Direction becomes easier to recognize. That shift from breath to alignment isn't something to manage. It's a posture to learn. Paying attention to where energy gathers instead of scatters. Releasing variations that no longer serve what's forming. Alignment isn't about doing more. It's about allowing identity to shape the choices that follow. And this is the part of the journey that rarely gets talked about. That space, after you realize something is shifting, but before you know what to do with it. From the outside, things are still working. The role still matters. And yet internally, there's a sense of being mid-process, like something is still fermenting, still aging, not ready to be bottled yet. This is the tension that isn't something to fix. It's something you stay with. In whiskey making, time and pressure aren't obstacles. They're essential. Formation happens quietly, in darkness, and without rushing. The same is often true here. This space is doing work in us, clarifying what matters and stripping away what no longer belongs. It's shaping an identity that can hold significance. Staying with the tension is how alignment forms before it ever becomes visible. And when the time comes, the clarity will be ready. Not forced, but distilled. If you've ever gone to a whiskey tasting, you write down notes of what you've tasted, the things that stood out, and the things you want to remember. Here are my tasting notes from today. Yours might be different. Some seasons call for range. Others call for alignment. Being broadly capable can be good and faithful and necessary. There are also moments when clarity begins to ask for definition. Identity chosen with intention allows choices to cohere. Energy gathers. Direction becomes clear. Significance grows from alignment with what matters most. These are my tasting notes. Take your time with yours. And remember, clarity isn't found. It's crafted. Thanks for listening to Crafted Clarity. If you're a leader wrestling with the tension between success and significance, or you're trying to align your work with a deeper calling, I'd love to connect with you. If your organization is facing questions about strategy, whether it's alignment, ROI, or building confidence in your team, this is the work we do every day at iBrand. And if you walk this journey yourself, or maybe you're right in the middle of it, I'd love to hear your story and maybe even share it here on the podcast. You can find me at craftedclarity.net.